father worked at Holloway Penitentiary, and he disappeared inside the Blackout Ward. Everything I knew after that was a lie. He never talked much about his job. He would come home late, his eyes red from the fluorescent lights, his uniform smelling faintly of bleach. When I asked him what he did, he would say only, "Keep the bad ones in line." But when he disappeared in 1988, I started digging. Holloway was a real place. You can find the name in old newspaper clippings about gang riots, prison overcrowding, and budget cuts. What you won't find in the archives is any mention of Block E, a wing that was officially under renovation for asbestos. Block E wasn't under renovation. It was the Blackout Ward. During the late 1970s and 1980s, psychologists were fascinated with sensory deprivation. The idea was simple: cut people off from light, sound, and human contact, and then study what happened to their minds. There are documented experiments from Canada where volunteers were paid to lie in dark rooms for days. After just a few hours, they started hallucinating. After a few days, they broke down entirely. Now imagine doing that with violent inmates. That was the Blackout Ward. According to the few scraps of paperwork I found in an unmarked box in our attic, the ward's official mission was rehabilitation through controlled isolation. But between the lines, you could see what it really was. A place to push human beings past the limits of the mind and see what crawled out of the other side. My father wasn't a scientist. He was a corrections officer. His job was to walk the outer halls, deliver meals, and file nightly reports. The ward cells were designed so the guards couldn't see the inmates directly. There were no windows, no bars, just steel doors with food slots and heavy locks. Inside, it was total darkness. The lights in those cells were wired to a master switch. When they sealed a prisoner inside, the bulb went dark and stayed dark for days, sometimes weeks. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. My father wrote in one report, "Inmate 14 refuses to eat, claims food smells like soil, heard whispering in his cell when slot was closed. No one else present." Another entry said, "Inmate 9 tried to claw his own eyes out, screamed that the dark was moving." At first, I thought these reports were exaggerations. Prisoners hallucinate, guards dramatize. But then I found something else in that box. It was Polaroids. There were 7 photos, each labeled with a cell number. Most of them showed nothing but concrete walls and the faint reflection of the flash. But the third one made me drop the stack. It showed a prisoner curled in the corner, his hands over his face. But behind him, where there should have been a flat wall, there was a shape. Not a shadow. Shadows fall away from light. This was darker than the wall itself. A human outline pressed against the concrete, bending toward him. On the back of the photo, my father had written, "Figure appears when flash used, not seen with naked eye." I couldn't breathe when I read that, because my father wasn't the type to write nonsense. He was methodical, a man who only recorded facts. The reports got worse over time. Inmates stopped responding to their numbers at roll call. Instead, they would press their faces to the food slot and whisper names of guards, names of family members, sometimes names they couldn't possibly have known. One entry said, "Inmate 6 called me by name, never spoken to him, told me he heard my son crying in the dark. My son is 4 years old." That entry was in my father's handwriting. He was talking about me. Another report mentioned the lights in the main corridor flickering whenever the ward doors were opened, as if the darkness inside was bleeding out. The last report I found in the attic box was dated September 14, 1988. It was a short entry, scrawled fast, the pen digging into the page. Entire block dark, master switch unresponsive, prisoners chanting, not words, sounds, multiple voices in unison, staff ordered to hold position. That was the last time my father's handwriting appeared in any record. A week later, Holloway announced that Block E was being sealed permanently due to hazardous structural instability. My father's name never appeared in the staff rosters again. To the world, he had just quit. To me, he had vanished. So I broke into Holloway in 2003, 15 years after Block E was sealed. The prison had closed down by then. The newer facilities had taken the overflow, and Holloway sat empty on the edge of town, its windows broken, its yards overgrown with weeds. People said it was haunted. Teenagers dared each other to sneak in. Most of them never made it past the gates. But I wasn't there for dares. I was there for answers. The front doors had been welded shut, but I found a side entrance through the laundry tunnels. The air inside was damp and metallic. My flashlight beam swept across rusted bars, abandoned bunks, graffiti on the peeling paint. The further I went, the quieter it became. My boots echoed down corridors where men had once screamed. And then I found a steel door, painted over with black warning symbols. Block E hazardous, do not enter. The welds across the frame had been cut long ago, probably by scavengers. But the door itself groaned like something alive when I pushed it open. Beyond was a hallway lined with cell doors, each slot bolted shut. The air was colder here and thicker, as if it had weight. I opened the food slot of cell 9, the one my father had written about, the man who tried to claw out his own eyes. The smell hit me first, stale iron and mildew. My flashlight showed a bed frame, a crumbling mattress, and scratches on the walls. Long scratches, like someone had dragged their nails until they broke. Then I noticed something else. The scratches weren't random, they formed words. Over and over in jagged letters, "Don't turn off the light." But there were no lights in the cell, not anymore. As I moved deeper into the ward, I began to hear it. Faint at first, like air moving through vents. Then louder. Dozens of voices, speaking in unison. I froze, my flashlight flickered. There was no one else in that block. No footsteps but mine. No sign of life. But the sound pressed from every direction, rising and falling in a cadence that made my stomach twist. I recognized it from my father's last report. Not words, sounds, multiple voices in unison. At the end of the corridor was a locked observation office. The glass had been shattered long ago, so I climbed through. Inside were scattered files, overturned chairs, and a box of photographs. My heart nearly stopped. It was the same box from our attic, the one my father must have taken home. But here there were more photos. Dozens, hundreds. Some showed empty cells. Some showed prisoners cowering in corners, and some showed figures pressed against the walls. Not shadows, not tricks of light. Figures with elongated arms, eyeless faces, and bodies that seemed to stretch and bend like smoke. And in the last Polaroid, I saw something that made me drop the stack. It was my father. He was standing in the corridor, uniform torn, his flashlight raised. And behind him, rising out of the open doorway, was a black shape that looked almost human, its head bent low toward his shoulder. On the back, in my father's handwriting, were 3 words. "It knows me." The chanting grew louder. The floor vibrated under my boots. My flashlight beam swept across the office window, and for just a second, I saw faces looking back at me. Pressed against the glass from the hallway outside. Pale, eyeless faces, grinning mouths too wide. I stumbled back. The chanting broke into shrieks, dozens of them, all screaming at once. The lights overhead, dead for 15 years, flickered on. For an instant, I saw every cell door bulge outward, as if something inside was pushing to get free. Then the bulbs exploded, and the corridor dropped into darkness. I ran. I don't remember which halls I took, or how many times I slammed into walls. I only remember the sound of footsteps chasing me, too many to count. When I finally burst through the laundry tunnel into the night, I collapsed on the grass, gasping, covered in dust and blood from my own scratches. Behind me, the prison stood silent. The chanting was gone, the lights were gone. But when I pulled my flashlight from my pocket, I saw something smeared across its lens. Not dirt, not blood. A fingerprint. And it's not mine. I've never gone back. Holloway was demolished 5 years later, the land paved over for a shopping center. People walk there every day, buying groceries and clothes, never knowing what was sealed beneath. But sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I hear it again. That rhythm, that chant. And sometimes, when I wake in the dark, I swear I see the faint outline of a face pressed against my bedroom wall.